We're talking today with Kent Laudeman of Niles, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Kent, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born 1943 in Bremen, Indiana. It's about 25 miles south of South Bend.
Okay, and did you grow up there?
I grew up there until I went to college and then kind of left that particular area and went to Western Michigan University.
Okay, what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
My dad was a farmer. I grew up on a farm. And my mother did some office work for Monsanto.
Okay, all right. And when did you finish high school?
In 1961.
Okay, and then you went to Western Michigan University from there.
Went to Indiana Central College for 2 years.
Okay.
And then transferred up to Western Michigan University and was there for, a total of 7 years. I avoided the draft for a long, long time.
Okay, that was the year you would graduate school keep you out at that?
So 65, I mean, I was a college deferment from 61 to 65.
Mm-hmm.
And then 65 to 68, 3 years of graduate work and continued that deferment.
All right.
Till Uncle Sam caught up.
I guess my impression was that in a lot of cases the graduate school deferment had already gone away, or did you start early enough that...
Well, the draft ended in 75, so
Yeah.
I was still 66, 67, 68.
Yeah, but I
Graduate
think my impression was in that period that the graduate school deferment had already gone away. You couldn't just hide in graduate school necessarily.
Well, I could until they caught up with me in 68. They didn't let me defer anymore because I wasn't married. I wasn't working in a critical situation.
So you managed to kind of get there under the radar.
Right.
Okay. So what were you studying in graduate school?
Undergraduate work was elementary education because I thought I wanted to be a teacher and a principal. And then I got into counseling and student personnel services.
All right. So what kind of impression or understanding did you have of the Vietnam War while you were in college?
Whoa, interesting. That's probably why I pursued the deferment. Nobody in my family had ever been in the service, so I had no experience to fall back on. And that wasn't really a pleasant time with Kent State, Jackson State, and so forth, as the culture was such that you were kind of for or against it, okay?
Yeah. All right, yeah, so that's all sort of kind of going on.
Vietnam period.
All right. But then you eventually, you get a draft notice?
I was drafted, so I changed from one induction center, which was Indiana, up to Michigan, deferred for a little bit more. Got a delayed entry plan because I was writing a thesis for a specialist degree at that particular time. That bought me another 3 months. It got me into late August and September. But
Of what year?
Of 1968.
Okay. All right. And so at this point, are you going in as enlisted?
So I was drafted as enlisted. I had checked and thought maybe I could get into social work or something like that with the counseling background, but the recruiter said, no, we really don't need that kind of person. So I was drafted, got in, did basic and advanced training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, in 11 Bravo infantry.
Okay. So you said you go Fort Dix for basic. Now, what was that like? What happened there?
Well, I was lucky enough to be put in a company and a platoon that had mostly college students in it, which was just exceptional. I mean, they kind of said we were loafing, but when it came time to take the APFT, the physical fitness test, we always came through. We knew when we had to show up, is what it amounted to. Otherwise, okay, we were playing the game and going through all of the drill and everything like that, and being a good soldier, okay, but not being overly good as far as a soldier is concerned.
Okay. What impression did you have of the drill instructors, or did you know anything about what their backgrounds were?
Smoky hats were pretty much pushers, NCOs, good physical shape, gung-ho. I mean, what we pretty much experienced. I think given my farm background, discipline, hard work, and so forth, it didn't hit me in terms of the discipline and regimentation like it did some college graduates.
Okay, so you adapted to Army life
I could
relatively
adapt,
easily.
right.
Okay. Now, did some of the other guys you were with have a lot more trouble?
Oh, yes.
What kinds of things went on with them?
Some of it was just the pressure and the stress of the constant pushing, encouragement to do better, excel, be all you can be, when they kind of knew what they could be, and because they were drafted, didn't want to be, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And were just there because they were drafted, okay? And pushing through the 2 years or the 3 years, whatever they had been required to sign up for.
But were they basically accepting of their fate on some level? And okay, I'm
Pretty
here,
much
I'll
so.
just get through it. Yeah.
Pretty much so, yeah.
All right. How long did basic last?
Ooh, 8 weeks, and then
okay.
another 8 weeks for advanced infantry training.
Okay. Now, to what extent was the advanced training geared toward Vietnam?
It was always lingering in the back of your mind. I mean, this is the height from 65 to 75, so 68,
Yeah.
late 68, 69, that was there. The NCOs that pushed us said, you know, if you don't do well, you're gonna probably end up there. So, you know, they used it in a motivating kind of way. But really, none of the training for basic or AIT was standard training.
Okay.
I mean, it was not in preparation for Vietnam. It was standard training.
All right. So you could go anywhere, essentially.
Could go anywhere.
Okay. Is that another 8 weeks?
So I finished the AIT, and then you got sent on for MOS training in a particular school. They sent me to Fort Gordon, Georgia, to be an auto-den person, which is typist and message trafficking, so forth. And so I went down there, and that happened to be also where social workers in the Army went. They were going to be officers, so I scampered over there and then gently inquired and said, you know, what's the chances of getting transferred out of auto-den training to being in social work, given my particular background? And nobody would listen to me. But in basic, I put all the paperwork in for a direct commission.
Okay.
And that came through. I finished auto-den training.
So what did
Was
auto-din training consist of?
Basically, teletype, that kind of messaging, okay? Ticker tape cards, if you think about what we were doing in terms of technology and communication at that particular time, okay?
So an early computer cards?
Computer cards. So, you know, sometime maybe when you went through registration, you got a stack of cards. Well, that's similar to what was happening as far as auto-din training was concerned.
Okay. All right. But then, okay. So at this point, it's possible then for someone like yourself who's got a college degree or some kind of specialized background to receive a direct commission to do for certain kinds of jobs.
I put everything in, okay? Now, whether I would get it or not, I don't know. My wife was expecting our first son at that time. She was back in Bremen with my parents. So after I finished auto-den school, I was put into a holding company and was put in charge of a platoon as far as that company is concerned. So was just kind of doing general
Right.
NCO specialist kinds of duties and so forth.
All right. But then the commission actually does come through.
So at the end of June, I was commissioned as second lieutenant in the Adjutant General Corps.
All right. And so now what happens to you?
Now I got sent to Fort Ben Harrison for basic officer training, and went through that program. By that time, I had almost a year of enlisted training, so I was in pretty good shape for that, physically speaking, mentally speaking, training as far as first aid, CPR, all of that kind of good stuff, okay, that you generally get in officer basic school.
Okay. I guess usually thinks of officer basic as being in places like Fort Benning and so forth, and Harrison's like a finance institution.
So Adjutant General School was there and finance was there.
There. Okay. So do you think you got a somewhat less physically intense officer training than you would get if you were doing infantry, or do you think?
Well, I
you had
think
the
it was probably more akin to my background, and therefore felt more comfortable with it. I'm not really a combat person, as we'll see, and got into civil affairs. So to me, it was like going back to school again. I mean,
Okay.
I enjoyed it. You were in the barracks, you had a room by yourself, you were treated like a junior officer. I enjoyed it. I could have stayed there for the same time I spent in college.
All right. And what were you actually learning there?
Doing different kinds of things, pretty much adjutant general kind of stuff, which would be paperwork, which would be awards, which would be personnel actions, things of that nature from an administrative perspective. So that was very comfortable to me.
Okay, so this is specifically officer training for adjutants,
You're right.
people in that office.
I mean, you
not-
still had weapons qualification and some general training, but that was just kind of redundant and repetitive of what I had earlier as an enlisted person.
Right, okay. And how long were you there?
Ooh, probably about 12 weeks. And from there, I went to be a second lieutenant at the AFI station in Little Rock, Arkansas, and that's the Armed Forces Entrance and Induction Station.
Okay,
So now I got to see where I came through in Detroit, what got me there, and I was the psychological examiner at the AFI station in Little Rock, Arkansas.
all right. So what does that job actually consist of?
So anybody that was being drafted or that was volunteering came through the Armed Forces Entrance and Examination Station. And part of that was the ASVAB, the battery in terms of aptitude and maybe the identification of what was going to be best for you in a draft kind of way. Or if you were enlisted, you were kind of talked into a particular MOS. So we did the aptitude part of that, and if somebody was struggling with that, then I had to do a reading test, an interview, and determine whether the person was fit or not fit as far as being drafted or volunteering for the service.
All right. And how long were you there?
I was there almost a year.
Okay. Now, did you like that job, or?
I did like that job, and we were at the Little Rock Air Force Station, which was outside of town. I knew the Dictionary of Occupational Titles as far as titles were concerned, but one of the fellows that I didn't approve for being a volunteer was somebody that came out of the Ozarks and could not read and desperately wanted to be in. So we went through that. His occupation was really chicken catcher. So he, at night, would go in and take the chickens off the roost, put them into the cage, and some of those 18-wheelers you saw with multiple chicken cages was indeed, he was doing that. That was in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. And I said, I just can't let you join the service because your lack of reading skills and what the service was looking for and so forth. And at that time, there was a Marine captain who had recruited this particular individual, and he locked my heels at the door one day and said, you know, how dare you, Lieutenant, not accept my recruit? And I stood by it. I still said, you know, this was not doing the individual any good, and it was not going to do the service any good, and so forth, and led to when I left my first Arkansa medal at that particular place. So I had a good group of a couple of college students who were working with me as far as the testing is concerned, the interviewing is concerned, and everything like that. I enjoyed it because it kind of tied in some of my counseling, my assessment kind of things that I had learned while I was in graduate school and so forth. I would have stayed there.
All right. So what do you get to do next?
Well, then I got sent to Vietnam, okay, and therefore I went down to Fort Polk for ARVN training for about a week.
What did that consist of?
Excuse me?
What did that consist of?
Well, that consisted of more what you could expect to find as far as being in Vietnam. And that would be things like booby traps, watching for booby traps, living in a jungle kind of situation and so forth. What's a triple canopy like and so forth. So Louisiana, probably hot, humid, fit that particular scenario best, and that's where the ARVN training was at.
Did they try to teach you anything about the culture of the place or the people or anything?
I don't remember anything about culture, to tell you the truth.
No, because with Fort Polk was where they trained the combat infantry, or a lot of it, so it's
Yeah.
kind of geared toward that.
So that was definitely military-oriented, squad work, self-defense, unit defense, unit aggression, and so forth, okay? Strictly military in this case.
Did they march you out into the swamp or field someplace? And have you
No,
sleep?
we were lieutenants going through that particular training, so we went out as a unit, but nothing like basic training in EIT
Yeah.
for an enlisted person and so forth.
All right, now is it on to Vietnam from there?
On to Vietnam for a year, arrived in August and left in June, arrived in August of 70 and left in June of 71.
Okay. How did they get you out to Vietnam?
Whoa, I was an individual replacement, so I didn't go as a part of a unit.
Right. You have
That's
to
a good
report-
question. I don't remember
Most
altogether
people-
other than a long flight.
Yeah, most people had to report to someplace on the West Coast, one depot or another.
I went out of the East Coast,
Okay.
came into Tan Son Nhut and Long Binh. Long Binh was the fabricated metal roof shelters that everybody came into, etc. And went through a brief orientation there, but no training. And then went from there to the 1st Signal Brigade, which was actually located in Saigon itself,
Okay. So actually in the city as opposed to,
in the city.
all right, and what kind of facility or compound did you have?
It was in a compound, walled compound, right in the middle of things. We did have a high walled fence that went around it, and a set of buildings inside. We ate our meals outside, probably about 150, 200 yards, because it served not only that compound, but a couple other compounds in that area. I remember it being on a major roadway between Tan Son Nhut and Cholan PX. Why do I remember that? Because it went by the fish market, okay, which had a very distinct kind of smell to it that I'll remember to this day.
And Cholan is a neighborhood in Saigon proper.
Yes, it is, as you go towards downtown South Bend, right downtown Saigon, okay?
All right. Now, what did your duties consist of there?
Adjutant, so basically I was doing awards, assignments, the support. I was in charge of the hiring of our Vietnamese that worked within the compound, Papasans, Mamasans, and so forth.
All right. Now, did they give you any kind of orientation or training for that, or they just say, here you go?
I did have a major that I reported to, so he was my training and kind of a mentor in this case. Commander was a colonel. 1st Signal Brigade in this case had the billboard antennas scattered throughout the country and did the long haul communication from country outside of country or outside of country inside.
Now, did you have some experienced enlisted men working under you who knew what they were doing?
I had enlisted in the assignment section and in the award section, all in the same building, and I had a Chief Warrant Officer 3 that was in the personal assignment that reported to me and the major at the same time.
All right. And what kind of living quarters did you have?
We lived in, what would I call it? Not a barracks. It was a 2-story building, standard kind of what you might find in the Saigon area. I remember the first couple of nights there, they gave me a mosquito netting, which was terribly hot. And then sometime later, I got an individual room that had an overhead fan, and wow, that was great because it kept the mosquitoes off of you and gave a little bit of air movement. Okay, so my quarters were pretty good. There was an officer's room where you could go in the evening, and there was an NCO club we didn't go to, but the NCOs could go to. Wasn't a whole lot to do within the compound other than work. I mean, at best, you maybe had a half day off during the week to get your laundry done or something of that nature. The best trips were outside of there to Tonsanut for a breakfast on a Sunday morning or something like that, and probably had the best Western omelet that I could think of at an Air Force mess.
All right. Now, would you go into Saigon proper much?
I had to go to the Cholon PX to pick up the piastre to pay for the Mamasans, the Papasans, and so forth. So once a week I was going down there, all right?
But were you allowed or able to go, to restaurants or other things like that?
I did some of that. I signed up for a Vietnamese class, but I didn't have the time to pursue it beyond that. Picked up a few things to go along with that. And outside the compound, there were some restaurants where you could get a Vietnamese kind of meal and go from there. I did make some trips into Vung Tau and other areas because we had small detachments that supported the billboards that were located in the different provinces. But I didn't get up to I Corps, I didn't get up to Second Corps, I did get down to the Delta a couple times.
Okay. And when you did travel around, how did you travel?
Basically by Jeep, except I made a pay run, was in a Loche, two-seater, low-flying craft. We skimmed over the treetops, etc.
All right. Did you have a sense that it was relatively safe to drive around the areas that you were in?
Pretty safe, because I was always out during the daytime, never out during the nighttime. We could hear the bombs being dropped as far as the B-52s were concerned. I mean, yeah, the windows would rattle a little bit, etc. But other than somebody shooting over the wall or through the razor wire, felt pretty secure in terms of where we were at. So I was very fortunate.
Okay. Now, were there rules about sort of where you could go and not go in Saigon, or what kinds of things you could do or not do?
Safety was always emphasized, always going out with another person. At that time, we had the Jeeps with the open doors, nothing like what we had in Saudi Arabia or anything like that. Traffic was always an issue, bicycles, sickelos, and so forth. So you had to be careful in that sense. There were the opportunists that would kind of fake an accident if you weren't careful, which then brought the MPs and an investigation and some things like that. So you always traveled with somebody else as far as the vehicle is concerned, okay?
Mm-hmm. All right. And were there, like you say, maybe among the enlisted, were there issues involving things like drug use or...
I didn't notice it that much, and I don't think I noticed it that much among the combat troops, but certainly in the support sectors where people were behind in a safe area, boredom being rampant, heat being high, and everything like that, is where I saw some of the drugs begin to make their encroachment in terms of soldier boredom and so forth. Mm-hmm. We were pretty much a male organization at that particular time, so didn't see some of the things that we encountered as far as Desert Storm is concerned, okay?
Mm-hmm. Okay, but there would have been prostitution and so forth.
Oh, yes.
on in the city and that kind of thing.
Yes, right outside the gate to the compound.
Now, was your compound sort of just for Signal Brigade or?
Just for the 1st Signal Brigade.
Okay. And so you may have had a little bit more select group than you'd have in some of the bigger bases, or?
I think probably so.
Yeah.
Certainly as far as Longmen was huge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Now, did you have any kind of sense from where you were about how the larger war was going? I mean, were we successful as far as you could tell? Or?
Well, we didn't have access to CNN or anything like that we had in Desert Storm. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's pretty much mail communication that we had at that particular time. I don't even remember calling home when I was in Saigon and Vietnam.
Yeah. But I guess from where you were, there might be people who actually have some idea what was actually happening in the war at the time.
Stars and Stripes was the primary means of communication.
Okay. Now, you would have been there, I guess, when the Cambodian incursion was going on?
70, 71, so
Yeah.
that was after Tet Offensive
Yeah.
in 68.
But
There were always-
Cambodia was mid-1970, so maybe
Yeah, I
did you
mean,
get there after that had happened?
The Ho Chi Minh Trail, one never knew where that went.
Yeah.
I mean, it was supposed to be in Vietnam, but no, it crossed the border and got into Laos, got into Cambodia, etc.
Yeah.
So we heard those kinds of stories,
Mhm.
but really didn't see anything in print.
Because I
that I
guess that
recall.
was the big news item of 1970 was American and South Vietnamese troops actually going into Cambodia to try to chase out the North Vietnamese bases. But so basically, that kind of stuff, news from the fighting or whatever, was not really
Other than what you picked up in the Stars and Stripes or something like that.
circulated where you were. All right.
Well, we were aware of the body count. I mean, Vietnam was the body count in terms of success, okay? So, yes, aware of that particular measurement as far as success, lack of success, and so forth.
And then did you have any, now this is also a period of Vietnamization, that is, the Americans were trying to kind of turn more over to
Yep.
the South Vietnamese, and was that anything that you noticed?
My awareness were the Montagnards were terribly helpful to us in terms of the higher elevations, et cetera, certainly up in I Corps and Second
Yeah.
Corps. Vietnamization, we're aware of the politics that was happening as far as the Saigon government is concerned. Sometimes successful, sometimes not successful. I think we can say the same thing that's happening in Afghanistan right now. I mean, depending on who you talk to, what's successful was working well, and you could talk to somebody a day later and say, you know, motivation was slow, couldn't depend on it, in spite of what we were doing in terms of training and everything like that.
I mean, did you have any sense that sooner or later this whole thing was going to go bust, or did you think the situation could kind of go on indefinitely?
I think most of those who went to Vietnam felt that we went there with a purpose. We didn't go to Canada or anything like that. We were ordered to go there, went there with the intent of doing the best job that we could possibly do. And felt certainly as you interacted with the Vietnamese, the Papa Sans, the Mama Sans, and so forth, okay, that we were there protecting the people in terms of North Vietnam and so forth. I mean, black pajamas, yeah, we were familiar with that. We didn't really encounter that. We're aware that some of that was going on and so forth, okay? My Lai was not prominent. I really learned about My Lai when I came back more than when I was there.
All right. So basically for you, it was simply an assignment. You were in the Army, you went there, you did your job, you put in did you do a full 12 months there?
Did a full 12 months.
All right. Did you get an R&R at any point while you were there?
I had an R&R, but didn't have my wife come over. I went to Australia and actually took a train up to the Blue Mountains, stayed with a family, saw Sydney, so it was positive for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a totally different experience for a while.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So now when you come back then from Vietnam.
Then I experienced the culture in terms of what's going on back here and so forth. Literally said I wanted nothing to do with this, had my opportunity to go from a first lieutenant to a captain. Nope, the culture was such, was negative, not supportive. Higher education certainly wasn't supportive of it, okay? Came back and got a job with Indiana University at South Bend.
All right.
In 71.
So did you leave the military entirely?
I left it entirely.
Okay.
Hung my uniform up. I mean, I had the experience coming back through Oakland, and that's when it really began to hit
So
me.
what did you see there? What happens when you get back? Did you land at military base and then go to the airport, or did you land at the
I was
airport?
came to land in Oakland, was put in a very small room. I just remember it was almost the size of a closet. And you're kind of wondering, you know, when you're going to leave this place. It was not the place to leave at that particular time because of the culture, the anger, and everything like that. So I just stayed in the Oakland base until I caught a plane. I caught a plane back came through Chicago. I ended up in Traverse City, because that's where my wife was with her mother and father at that particular time. She moved from Bremen, Indiana, up to that area. I was terribly tanned, terribly dark, had a mustache. If you would have hung a number on the front of me, you know, you would have guessed I was a criminal someplace, all right?
Now, were you in civilian clothes at this point?
I was in civilian clothes, and I remember looking at my son, and he broke out crying because he didn't know who the hell this stranger was,
Yeah.
etc., okay? So that kind of added to my feelings of kind of alienation and discomfort, I guess, in coming back and deciding I didn't want to have anything to do with the military.
All right. So then you said you took a job.
IU South Bend with a Division of Education, because I had that educational
Yeah,
kind of background. Eldon Ruff, the director of the Division of Education at that time, came from my particular area. It was kind of the networking that got me started there. I absolutely loved it. I think I made $12,000 a year. Realized it was going to be difficult to support a family of two at that particular time. And said, okay, about a year later, maybe I need to look at a second job and look at a USAR center where I could go back in as an instructor at Kingsbury, Indiana, near LaPorte. So about a year later, I did get back in as a USAR instructor
So
with
was AR is an Army
Kingsbury.
Reserve?
Yep.
Yeah, all right.
So we got back into the reserves for economical purposes, and I was doing, again, something that I enjoyed doing, something I was teaching.
All right. Now, was this a job switch or just a second job added to the first?
Well, it was kind of instructor, kind of like adjutant general, working with people in a
But was that a
counseling
full-time job, though, I guess?
No, that was Army Reserve, because my full-time job was with IU South Bend.
Okay, so you still had it. So
a
your
second job.
reservist, like the other ones, it's sort of the weekend, a version of the weekend warrior thing.
Yep, stayed there for 1 year, and then heard about the Civil Affairs Unit in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and made the transfer.
All right. Now, explain a little bit what that particular unit is.
Civil Affairs is, if you remember World War II, they provided the liaison, the connecting link with the military, with the government, with finance, with education, etc. I mean, they were the link between the military and we now call it host nation, okay? So I saw a health team, I saw a law enforcement team, I saw an education team, I saw an economics kind of team. I said, whoa. And about 40% were officers. That particular company was commanded by a lieutenant colonel. So there was about 42% officers, senior enlisted, and even the senior enlisted were well-educated and semi-professional, professional people. So I saw a networking opportunity and just absolutely loved the unit, okay? I mean, I could see a veterinarian if our dog was having a problem. I could go talk to an accountant. I could talk to the commander, excuse me, the director of police forces in Western Michigan, okay, at Kalamazoo. I mean, this was a neat unit, okay? So I loved it and worked myself up to, in 90, I became the company commander and served my 3 years there. And I remember in November going down, and now I have to look for another position because I had homesteaded there for a long time, okay? Where most people move around from one unit to another unit to advance more quickly and everything like that. So I managed to stay there through a number of different positions. Finally had to leave and heard about the 21st TACOM down in Indianapolis, Indiana. And they were aligned with the 21st in Germany at Kaiserslautern. So their annual training would be to fall in Germany. Whoa, I said, this is a great chance to travel and everything like that, okay, for 2 years of 2 summers, 2 weeks of annual training in the summer and so forth. So I became their director, assistant chief of staff for host nation support at the 21st TACOM. I went in and interviewed in November, just a little bit before Thanksgiving. And I remember on December 2nd or something like that, they gave me a call. I was sitting at my desk at IU South Bend, and they said, oh, by the way, what is your interest in getting into the unit, because we're going to be mobilized for the Gulf War? I said, well, I interviewed. I said I was interested. If you get mobilized, I will go with the unit. And I did. On December 4th, they were mobilized in 1990.
Okay, I just want to back up a little bit. When you were talking about being with the Civil Affairs Unit, I think you were mentioning dates in the 90s, so you would have meant dates in the 80s or 70s?
So, well, I got back in 70, so 72 to 90.
Okay.
I was in the Civil Affairs
All right.
Company.
Okay. Now, during the time when you were with the Civil Affairs Company, did they ever send you any place? Or did you do training in any odd places?
That's an interesting question. Yes. I think our first training was to an Indian reservation in northern Michigan. And we were staying in a school. That was our housing facility. And then working on the reservation and doing different things with Indians. I mean, it could be a construction kind of thing, it could be an educational kind of thing, and so forth. And absolutely loved it again. Okay, amazing. How can you go wrong with something like this? Now, also during that time, the 315th Civil Affairs Company was aligned to support reforger kinds of activities and events, return of forces to Germany. And during that time, even before I got into the TACOM, I had spent 2 weeks of annual training in Belgium, in Netherlands, and in Germany, which then supported my going with the TACOM, which was also co-located with the unit in Kaiserslautern. So again, thoroughly, I mean, how can you get better 2 weeks of training? So when I was working at IUSB, I was either traveling for weekend training to Kalamazoo, and when I changed to Indianapolis, I just went south the other direction, and was still doing a similar kind of thing in terms of civil affairs work.
Right. Okay. But basically, during that extended period, your unit was never mobilized or anything like that, because they didn't have any actual wars going on.
That's right.
At that particular point.
But during the Gulf War, I met some of my peers out of the 315th that were mobilized and over in Gulf War. In fact, I ran across them in Kuwait City because they were brought in via another route, and I was then working with the 21st ACOM. And Nicholas Batch, Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas Batch, was a law professor at Western Michigan, a great friend of mine that I stayed in contact with, and I met him over at the airport in Kuwait, because he was there with the 415, not the 315th, the 415th Civil Affairs Company.
All right. So we can twist back around in your story here. So essentially, you join your new unit, and oh, by the way, we're being mobilized. So it's the end of 1990, you can find that out. Okay. Kind of pick up the story then from there.
So we were mobilized on the 4th of December, spent 2 weeks of training at home station. Again, went through weapons qualification, got a will started, personnel records were updated, did our CPR, first aid training, got equipment issued to you, NBC equipment, got all the training as far as masking and everything like that, so that you were prepared for that. We didn't take a lot of equipment with us other than personal equipment, okay? And we were had an advance party go over 2 weeks in advance of Christmas, and we basically arrived about a day before Christmas, the 25th of December.
All right. And how do they get you out there?
Ooh, we went from there to Ohio, from Ohio again out to Fort Dix, the East Coast up through Iceland, dropped into Spain, and from Spain then into Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
C-130.
All right, so a military aircraft. All right. And then what's your first impression then of Saudi Arabia when you get there?
Hot. We landed at night at Daharan Air Base, which is probably about 15 kilometers from where the 21st TACOM was working out of at that particular time. We were put, they had some makeshift accommodations. Actually, they had brought in some trailers. So they had 5 lieutenant colonels in one trailer, and there was a restroom in the middle, and 3 on one end and 2 on the other. And I said, well, this is kind of crowded on this end. I wonder why there's 3 of us here as versus 2 there. Well, I found out the day after Christmas that I was going to go forward. So, you know, I was kind of the excess person with all the other lieutenant colonels on that end of the trailer. After that, the trailer was traded for Kobar Towers, which is a high-rise complex that most of the unit went into after that. And then they started putting some Kuwaiti refugees into the trailer complex that we had. So I didn't have bad accommodations again. I wasn't living in a tent, okay?
So were you there when the Iraqis were launching Scud missiles?
So by that time, I was up at KKMC, King Kalaat Military City, off of what we call Tap Line Road that kind of ran from east to west, also known as MSR, Main Supply Route Dodge. It was the road that was used to really build King Kalaat Military City. King Kalaat is an interesting complex. And it sits right out in the middle of the desert, about 40 clicks south of Hafarabat, which was the main city in that particular area. Now, the U.S. engineers had the ingenuity, starting in about 1974, the Saudis started looking to develop some military complexes. And King Kalaat Military City was one of 3. The other one was at Tabuk, which is toward Jordan in the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia, and one was way down south. And then this one, KKMC, King Kalaat Military City. King Kalaat Military City had the 2nd largest cement plant in the world. It's in the shape of a hexagon, an elaborate structure that was designed to support at least a brigade from the Saudis. Actually, some would say it would hold up to 3 brigades. In the shape of a hexagon, underground parking, okay, had actually a hotel complex that was about 4 stories high, and we were in some barracks that were 4 to 5 stories high, much like a college dorm. And we had 3 of us to a room again. It was in the shape of figure 8, little courtyards in the middle of that, and several of those. So the Saudi army was in that until we deployed, and they went to the field, because now in August, when the Iraqis invaded Kuwait, that now brought a brigade from Tabuk and a brigade from down south to be on the front line with Iraq at that time. And it also took the brigade out of KKMC and put them on the front line. So the barracks was empty, and that's how we managed to get in there on the day after Christmas.
All right. And now what is your unit expecting to do?
So we're the liaison, okay? And I was the Assistant Chief of Staff, Northern Province for Host Nation Support. So I would liaison with General Pagonis, who was the commander of then the 22nd Support Command. We went from the 21st to the 22nd in country, okay? He was a 2-star in charge of that. He was promoted to a 3-star lieutenant general by Schwarzkopf January, so that he could compete and work with the 2 corps commanders, which was the 18th Airborne and the 7th Corps. So by the time that we got there in December, pretty much the 18th Airborne was in. And he was on the verge of being promoted at that particular time. The Air War started, January 16th, and we were in the midst of moving the 7th Corps in at that point, okay? And his main headquarters was out of Daharan. The major port was Dammam, an excellent deep water port, etc. And General Pergones said, you know, I was there a couple of weeks after Iraq invaded on the 2nd of August. And he told the story of operating out of the back end of a car, and he had actually cash in his trunk because he had about 7 guys working with him. And they brought the 18th Airborne in before they brought the support. So he was well behind the power curve in terms of support. So I was his forward up at KKMC for host nation support. The main was still back at Daharan. And I went up there with myself and 2 other people. We eventually had some more civil affairs support from the 304th CA group. And my cell got up to 17 people in working all host nation issues. So what's the host nation issue? Well, if you want to come up with a logistics base in the desert, you had to ask for that land. You just couldn't go out and start parking there and start developing your support base. So we got into all kinds of things: firing ranges, log bases, convoy support centers, actually using the main supply routes, etc. And back to KKMC. KKMC was about 18 square miles, had its own airport, brigade size, well developed. It was called the Emerald City because it had a fountain right in the center of it, okay? Had a hotel there, had 5 mosques there, had 3 swimming pools there, and had 8 wells. Now the well, our engineers could go down 200 feet and tap a well. The well at KKMC was 2,000 feet deep.
Wow.
Huge, about 8-inch diameter, etc. So that's where the water came from to support the 18th Airborne Corps, the 7th Corps, etc. It was the logistics hub with Log Base Bravo at KKMC.
Okay. Now, did you have Saudi counterparts that you
Oh
dealt
yes,
with?
oh yes. 2-star General Alchemy. General Alchemy was the commander. 1-star Brigadier General Shahari was the operations guy. 1-star Abdumaman was the kind of the S1 equivalent. So we had the S3, the S4, the commander, and the S1 that was my liaison.
All right. And what were these people like to work with?
Great. Most had been to a school in the U.S. Most spoke English. But all of our requests for host nation support, we did about 600 during the period of time that we were there, had to be written in Arabic. Okay, so we got the request in English, we converted it to Arabic. It was then submitted to the liaison. It then went from Alchemy to Abdumaman. Somebody that had to approve it came back to us in Arabic. We then transferred it into English and then got back to the unit that was making the request. So there's a story there. When we first went, we had access to a linguist from Special Forces that was there. That lasted about 2 weeks. Then I got a good captain that could speak and write Arabic from the 304th Civil Affairs Group. That lasted about 2 weeks, and Pergones says, hey, Laudeman, I need this captain because he needs to ride with the Egyptian Het Battalion. And a Het Battalion is something that can transport an M1 tank from the port up, and that was the pressure. So to make sure that that Het got down to the port, 1-day run, picked up, made another run back another day, and then was down for maintenance. We put with it a captain from the 304th CA group that was a linguist that could work with the Egyptians to make sure that that happened. So there went my linguist again, okay? Now I got into a situation where I heard about Sergeant Morris, Kent Morris. He was a Sergeant E5. he was working with a transportation company. And the company needed a four-wheel Jeep Cherokee that I had access to, and I needed a linguist. So it was probably the best trade I ever made in my life. I got the linguist, we started submitting requests to the Saudis again, all right? The things you get into in host nation support, okay?
Did you get to keep this one?
I kept him. And we actually put him on other assignments because I managed to then hire a third country national from the Sudan that we got cleared, and I could put in the office to do the translation and conversion from the English to the Arabic and submission in the Arabic back to the English again.
All right. Now, did you have any problems with the Saudis, or were they generally helpful?
Saudis, Ramadan started during this period of time. Ramadan is 1 month of basically fasting from daylight till sundown, and that created some problems for us, and because the Saudis generally would spend the evenings with their families and festivities, and of course they got hungry, they got a little bit disenchanted during the daytime, etc. Okay, we're not as easy to work with. Their Sunday was technically on Friday, so we had to work around that. They also had the 5 prayer periods during the day. We had to work around that. We couldn't go over and talk to our counterparts during that particular time. Or if we do well enough to cool our heels in the office for a period of time because they went to the prayer session, etc. So, yeah, there were some adjustments we had to make. One of my favorite sayings was, Inshallah, God willing. So Pagonis had a stand-up brief in the morning, about 30 minutes, where all the assistant chiefs of staff would indicate what they're working on for the particular day, what the problems were that they saw, and so forth. Very quick. He sat down, the rest of us stood up, half-hour meeting in the morning, and then we had a major sit-down during the evening, about an hour and a half, PowerPoint slides out the wazoo. I had my own. And many times during that briefing, I'd say, Inshallah, God willing, we will get an answer back and be able to help you out in terms of what the request was and so forth.
All right. But I guess the Saudis, as far as you could tell, were on some level happy to have us there?
They were happy to have us. On their time frame, though, not necessarily the Army time frame.
Right.
The Army time frame wanted it done right away. So one of those was, one of the stories was General Pagonis says, Laudeman, I heard that the Saudis have some trucks for us that we might be able to use, because we were short of transportation assets. And one of my stories, the letters that I sent to you was, yeah, he heard about that. So he said, Laudeman, I want you to go over and check with General Shahari. I hear there's some trucks that might be available to help us out, because we were short. I mean, we had the Egyptian Het Battalion that we set the linguists with to make sure that they were working in a regular kind of way, getting all the tanks and tracks up and everything like that. So I said, sir, follow up on it. So I went over the next day, I talked to General Shahari, and he says, yeah, I got some trucks, they're out in the desert for you. And he wrote me out an order. He put it in an envelope and put a wax seal on it, okay? So I couldn't see what it was in Arabic anyhow. He did that on the morning. So that day we left and headed to the desert. I took Kent Morris with me. He was my linguist. And we thought we knew where we were going. We were going to go about 20 clicks this way, turn left, go another 20 clicks, see beside the road there was this tire that was in the sand. At that point we were supposed to turn right and go another couple clicks. Well, we did that to the best of our knowledge. We came upon a Syrian camp. Interesting. The Syrians were some of the support forces that were part of the coalition forces there. And we asked about a truck farm in the desert. We were told there's 800 trucks here. Well, you would think that you could be able to see that. You know, the desert was flat except for a curve down. You lost sight of it, okay? We didn't think it'd be that hard. So the Syrian said, you know, go a couple clicks this way and see if you can, I think it's located there. I think we ran across them or something. Well, we went 2 clicks, and there was an Egyptian unit there, because there were Egyptian forces there too helping us out, okay? They said, well, no, we think it's over this way about 2 more clicks. So we went a couple more clicks. Finally, we ran into a compound, and we were looking for a Colonel Nasser at that time. Now, Colonel Nasser is like Colonel Bob. I mean, the names, you know, they never use last name, they use first name. So Colonel Nasser, we went through barbed wire concertina, and there was a single building setting there, probably about 10 feet by 10 feet, with a couple of vehicles parked outside and concertina around the outside, and there was a guard on it. So he let us in, we parked, and we went in, we went to the basement, and here's Colonel Nasser, he was watching TV. It happened to be a cartoon. Now there were 2 channels, a religious channel and a cartoon channel, but he was watching the cartoon channel at that particular time. He took the envelope, gave us some chai, some green coffee, okay, or tea. That had to start out with that first. Looked at it, and he called Captain Al-Ghamdi and said, picked it up on his phone and said, Captain Al-Ghamdi, come up here. I want you to meet a couple of guys. He came up there in about 20 minutes, had some more tea, okay, galwa, chai, and so forth. And he says, I'm going to take you to the truck farm. So we went another 3 kilometers into the desert. And we saw some tanker trucks first and said, we're getting close. And beyond the tanker trucks, there was this big high berm that they had walled dirt up around. Common defensive kind of perimeter, etc. And inside, he took us in there, and sure enough, there was this truck farm, okay? So we struck a deal to get 490 trucks. We were really looking for 18-wheelers, flatbeds, to haul heavier equipment. We got about 90 of those with sides, about another 90 without sides, and another 180 or so which were straight trucks. They were actually called circus trucks because they were painted all different colors and had sides all around. And said, okay, we'll take the 480 trucks. And he said, oh, by the way, 180 of these trucks come with drivers. So you're going to need to come back tomorrow with your transportation people and pick up the trucks, but bring along somebody else that can be the commander of the 180 drivers that have their own trucks. And we did that the next day.
Where did you find the people to drive the trucks?
Well, it came from the transportation companies that were located in and around KKMC, because, hey, we were about 25,000 strong, both at Daharan, Dammam, and up there, okay, by that time. And we brought a company commander that was going to take charge of this 180 trucks with drivers, all third country nationals. He picked them up, he took them back. About a month later, I saw him. And he says, Kent, don't ever do this to me again. And here are the issues. They came with their own little stoves, prayer rugs, and so forth, okay? And the first thing he learned is that he had to support them with meals. Well, he had to sort out any MREs with pork in it. Makes perfect sense, okay? But he said, you know, we worked through that. But one day I didn't get them the necessary oil that they needed. And all of a sudden, they pulled their oil plugs and drained everything out in the sand and couldn't do anything. Couldn't make the mail delivery, couldn't make the water delivery, couldn't move some of the small ammunition that we had on pallets and so forth. I mean, he came to a dead stop until they got oil. And that's just the way it worked. So he got his trucks, but he also got a headache of problems at the same time.
All right. Now, as all of this stuff is kind of going on, are you kind of paying attention to any of the build-up toward having an actual war?
Oh, yes. So we had access to CNN, unlike Vietnam. I mean, we could actually see what was being reported back stateside, et cetera. Okay? So we could tune in. We were very on top of it. We had the Stars and Stripes, and we also had access to a Saudi paper that was in English. Okay? So we could see what the Saudis were saying at the same time. I was surprised because the Saudi headquarters asked for CNN if they could have access to CNN. And we sent over a female signal sergeant to install it. which was kind of a no-no. I mean, females driving trucks, wearing T-shirts in Saudi Arabia, etc., was a no-no, culturally speaking. But again, the officers, etc., over there were pretty much accepting because they'd been stateside, they speak English and so forth, all right? So yes, we had more access to what was happening, certainly in the Gulf War. We know when the air war was starting, we knew what was happening with the air war, we know when the Blues Brothers were being dropped, we know when the Daisy Cutter was being dropped. And the thing that we started watching in those hour-and-a-half briefings at night was the available of heat rounds for artillery. Those rounds were important because they were going to penetrate the T-62s, the 72s, the 52s, etc. And we were ready to go. We could see that nightly. But as that got up then, we knew that we were going to be close to the launch of the ground war on February 24th.
All right. And now, as the ground war starts, or in the immediate buildup, I mean, what happens with you, or what are you doing?
We're still filling all these requests, whatever the request might be, all right? And we saw requests for barrier material. I mean, we had this big cement plant, and there were slabs of cement there left from the construction and everything like that. But the Saudis weren't willing to give that up, okay? And in spite of the thing, you would think that with sand, you could take an entrenching tool and dig a foxhole. It was very hard underneath that sand. So we were engaged in getting Saudi equipment, backhoes, bulldozers, anything like that that would help the units that were located either within KKMC itself or even on the outside of that. I mean, everybody was fearing a threat at that particular time and wanted to do as much barrier development as they possibly could. So we were engaged in all that stuff.
All right, let's take this about up. So we're going to pause right here, reload. Okay, so we've gotten in your story now to the point where the attack, or the, I guess, let's see.
So we could see the ground war was imminent. And we had the briefing that we could follow and see what Schwarzkopf and other commanders down at Riyadh were kind of thinking. We got good feedback on the air war that had started on, January 16th. We knew that they were bombing deep, and now we could see those targets beginning to come closer and closer and so forth, okay? And we were starting to get some inclinations that there were some desertions that were happening, okay? About 35 Iraqis were showing up here and there. Now, that led to another issue in EPW camps. And all of a sudden we had the 800th NP Brigade show up, which then brought, okay, I need land, I need equipment for a wall, I need razor well, I need tenting, I need cooking stuff, I need hygiene stuff. I mean, that just started a whole deluge of needs that we turned to the Saudis to try to help them out because they didn't bring it with them. So we were just perpetually, we were just one issue after another issue depending on what was happening at the particular time.
Okay. And then what happens then when the ground war actually begins?
So now the ground war starts, okay? And now we realize, wow, it's 1 million meals a day to keep this going. It's 6 million gallons of JP4 and diesel and gas to keep this going. It's ammunition. Are we going to get it there quick enough? It's the unit with the right hook, the airborne, that's going 100 kilometers or 160 kilometers in a day. And all of a sudden we got log bases far forward, but is it going to be able to reach, okay, the units now that are moving that fast? So it's a rush to move everything forward: water, fuel, food. Are we going to need replacement parts? I mean, we don't have to worry about barrier material anymore because we're moving so damn fast. Okay, we don't even have to think about that. But now, what are you going to do with the dead? We had a Greg battalion that was located at KKMC. Graves and Registration Battalion. And here's a sidebar. We didn't know how many casualties we were going to have. I mean, this was the mother of all wars. This is 500,000 Iraqis on one side and almost 200,000 combat, but 500,000 on the other side. That's going to clash at where we've got these trenches dug and oil that's there and everything like that, okay? And what are we going to do with casualties? And are we prepared for the casualties? And all of a sudden, the Saudis come online and said, what are we going to do with Iraqi casualties? Because we have a tremendous responsibility for our own casualties. And how it works from the company back to the battalion, to the division, to the corps, and out of country. And at KKMC, the Great Battalion was out of country as soon as possible. I mean, that is a primary mission and a core value as far as the U.S. is concerned. So we try to press that upon the Saudis. What are we going to do with the Iraqi casualties, okay? Whether it's in Iraq, across the line, perhaps in Saudi Arabia that we're going to have to take care of and so forth. So we got to come up with a equivalent kind of Saudi company with some platoons to do that. So in about 2 days, we're working that with the Saudis. They took a band unit of Saudis and converted it to a platoon of Saudis. Okay, now you got to have the trucks, you got to have the backhoes, you got to have the white wrapping material. What are you going to do, and so forth. And we were making great progress. We were ready to launch that group, and all of a sudden, Saudis say, "Hey, I can't cross the line between our country and Iraq." And we don't necessarily want to bury them because they feared that the Iraqis would find them and make it an incident, etc. Okay? So we have that great fear hanging over ahead, as well as we had 3 evacuation hospitals located at KKMC. The Emerald City was such it had an 8-story hospital. So the 3 evacs were located all around it, using the resources there, etc. I mean, this was huge. This is the mother of all battles that was going to happen on about a 300-mile front here, right in front of us, not more than 60 to 100 kilometers from us. So we had all of those things that we were working through, okay? Ground war. Okay, we're going. The air campaign is damaged as much as it can. We've seen it. We've watched it. We see it's getting closer and closer. EPWs start to show up. We got the 800th MP Brigade in here that's starting to develop. 45,000 EPWs expected over around KKMC and also further to the west. Now we got to start thinking about refugee camps, okay? Because all of a sudden we've got deserters beginning to show up. So that's huge on top of the supply mission. And we're working all of this to the best of our capability at that particular time. So we launch. Now we got to keep the fuel going, the water going, and everything like that, okay? We had probably 100 buses from the Saudis, because to move the troops forward, they didn't have enough military assets on their own. We brought only 1 bus back after the ground war, because they had ground them into the sand. And everything that was going forward, okay, was designed now to bring back our own casualties if necessary. But all of a sudden we had all these EPWs that were being brought back on anything that was a supply nature, where we took the flatbed forward with the ammunition and everything like that. Well, they come back empty, okay? But now, hey, we had EPWs just corralled in the sand in the desert and a couple of soldiers watching over them, waiting to be picked up. I mean, that's what was happening behind the battle lines at that particular time. There was always something going on that needed attention and support, as much as we could get from the Saudis. The Saudis basically paid for everything in country. We had to keep track of it though. Okay, all those buses, all those trucks, etc. They paid for. Now the trucks, where did the trucks come from? they were all consigned for by the Saudis. So they moved the coalition forces first, and they were then sitting in the truck farm. And that's why they were offered to the U.S., because we were late coming into the theater with a 7th Corps and trying to move supplies forward, okay? But they're all contracted. And that 180, they were privately owned by the third country national driver of that particular truck. So in spite of everything, you know, looking like a war, it was still contracting payments and everything like that going on at the same time.
All right.
Did I lose you?
No. I'm looking at it. Okay. So the shooting war only lasts a few days.
So 100-hour war. Okay. Now we have the problem in Basra with the Shiites. Okay, fearing Sunnis and Saddam, etc. Okay, and now we had refugee needs that were starting to develop. Okay. And the next thing that was happening after the 100-hour war, we put the tents up at Safwan when Schwarzkopf went up there to negotiate the end to it, etc. Okay, provided the security for it. So some more logistics kinds of things happening. Okay, so now the 100-hour war ends. We're trying to stabilize things in southern Iraq with the 1st Armored Division, the 1st Infantry Division, etc. Okay. And as things begin to quiet down, now what happens? It's Katie, bar the door, because the U.S. wants to get its soldiers home. So redeployment becomes our top issue. And at the same time that that's happening, we have the issue happening with the Kurds way up north. So now we're flying some of that supplies, tentage, water, MREs, okay, that we didn't use. We built up about 45 days worth of supply. We use 3 days worth or 100 hours worth. And now we're starting to ship that stuff up to northern Iraq to support the Kurds. So we got another logistics mission that's happening at the same time that we're trying to now move the 18th Airborne Corps out and the 7th Corps out. Okay, so here's another story. 1st Armored Division comes back. They got a redeployment area that's 20 by 25 kilometers square. Huge area. Before they can send their equipment to the port, they've got to clean it. This is U.S. agricultural kind of requirement, okay? Which means you need water, you need water, you need water. You always need water. So what happens in their 20 by 25 kilometer square area, they had a Saudi that they had contracted who had a private well of his own. And there was also a well in a small Saudi village that had about probably 15 huts in it, okay? They were more than a hut. It wasn't a tin hut or anything like that. It was substantial mud and so forth, okay? So the 1st Armored Division had promised to repair the well that had broken. Remember, this is 2,000 feet deep, okay? And in the meantime, he had a private well that was outside the little village. And the 1st Armored Division had sent over some guys to put down a 50,000-gallon bag and start drawing water off of it. And he got angry because they weren't repairing the well. That was part of the deal, okay? So all of a sudden, Kent Morris and I go out there, he's my linguist, and we find 4 guys over here with AK-47 Saudis, and over on this side is 4 guys with M16s, and each claiming the bag, the water, etc. And the guy saying, I'm not going to pump any more till you start paying me. And the U.S. saying, hey, we need it, and we're going to take it. So we went out, and a day later we cut a contract for 30,000 rials a month. That's about $8,000 a month to draw that water, okay? He started out at 120,000 rials a month, okay? The Saudis knew when they had somebody that they could make some money off of. I mean, that was the bad thing about host nation and contracting is the daggone cost kept going up every time you went back and you needed more. It had doubled, it had tripled. and we needed to bring the Saudis in to find out what's a reasonable rate for whatever is involved, whether it's water, whether it's fresh fruits and vegetables, whether it's bread. I mean, you lived on MREs for about 30 days, and then, that was a morale buster. So we had to get the fresh fruit, water, and everything like that we got from the Saudis. We got them from the Saudis, okay? At a cost. At a cost.
All right. So how long did you wind up spending in Saudi Arabia then?
I was there I got back in June. And by that time, we had brought into Saudi Arabia 400,000 short tons of ammunition. We only used 50,000 short tons. So short, we had 350,000 tons to clean up, pack up, and ship back, okay? We had firing ranges before we launched the ground war, where they did practice in the desert. And there was an unexploded ordnance that didn't explode when they fired it downrange. And to this day, I know that some camel herder Bedouin is going to stumble on that and blow to hell. Okay. And then we had to bring in the legal team. We had to solve that particular issue, pay the amount, etc. I mean, during the buildup, we had almost 25 vehicles passing a single point in a minute on Tapline Road, which is MSR Dodge. And at one time during the buildup, we were losing almost a soldier a day to a traffic accident. Part of that was due to the inexperienced Saudi drivers. They drove like a teenager, excuse me. If you were on a 2-lane highway and going too slow, they just cut to the desert and went around, okay? We didn't have enough MPs to put all over the place. So it was a dangerous place to be. And one time the slogan on the briefing slide was, not one more soldier that we were losing to a traffic accident, because of the high intensity as far as supporting the troops, the 2 corps that were out there. Plus, the British division was out there. The French division was out there. Coalition forces were out there, all using the same 2-lane highway, MSR Dodge.
All right. Now, did things eventually wind down for you, or?
When I left, we were trying to move everything out, okay? Including all the equipment that came in, the ammunition that came in, and everything like that, okay? So we're beginning to wind down. It's all coming back to KKMC. Except we were going to put a brigade-size unit in Kuwait. So in that case, we were cleaning up the equipment to move it to a new base, and that was going to become a support base in Kuwait, just outside of Kuwait City. In the event Saddam decided to do something against the Shiites that were still in southern Iraq, because that hadn't settled down altogether, okay? So when I left, we still had a host nation office that was still working in supporting the redeployment in terms of moving equipment out and so forth. Moved the personnel out first, then we moved the equipment out, etc., okay? I mean, the ammunition dump that we had, you couldn't even see to the end of it. I mean, just stacked up, and it came in a pallet, but by the time it came back in vehicles, the pallets were broken, so it had to be cleaned up, had to be repalletized, then reloaded, put it onto an 18-wheeler, shipped back to the port, loaded back up on the ship, and taken out again, okay? We had 20-foot and 40-foot containers stacked double and triple high in the desert, okay? Got in too late.
Now, did your unit go out together, or did you leave individually, or?
So we had an advance party that came in that was, I think, about 6 strong, early December. Then the main unit was 150. They came in before Christmas. And then we came out in May. Most of us came out in May, early June. We left behind, though, a fairly sizable cell of about 20, 30. Some of those were volunteers that came from other units that augmented the 21st TACOM that was working with the 22nd, because the movement took place for another year to get stuff out of country. So there were some volunteers that stayed well after that, yeah.
All right. I guess yours was a reserve unit, and there is an expectation that they get to go back home.
Yeah, we thought it would be over in about 2 months, right? I was listening to this story earlier here in Korea, and they thought it was going to be quick. Well, I remember Pagonis getting up on a stage and saying, you know, you loggies are going to be here in the last out. He's absolutely right.
Now, did you get into Kuwait yourself, or?
I was in Kuwait several times.
Okay, what were you doing there?
We had in the hospitals about 300 patients. Those three evac hospitals. Iraqis came across the line because they got hurt and things like that. I mean, they kept hitting the units all along. So we had a buildup of 300 patients in the evac hospitals that was located there at KKMC. And we did one bus trip back to Safwan, which was up through Kuwait and then into southern Iraq. We also did, about 18 Chinook lifts, of which we had about 24 Iraqis each, and because the evac hospital couldn't leave until, the patients were cleared out. Some didn't want to go back, okay? Some wanted to claim asylum and so forth. That was a whole other issue that we had to work through. So yes, probably Highway 1, where A-10 shot up the highway, and just terrific devastation. I mean, you could smell that when you drove through there. And I was through there about 2 days afterwards, okay, working that particular area. Just devastating. I mean, the number of vehicles and everything that was on the vehicles and everything like that.
Okay. Now, were there also oil fires and
Oh,
things
yes.
that were going?
Yep, so you drove through a black region. I mean, it was just like night. So our guys were exposed to plutonium as far as the ammunition is concerned. They were exposed to pesticides, because we used a lot of pesticides in the desert there. They were exposed to the oil fires that were there. So I don't know what's going to come out of the Gulf War when we really start to look at it 10, 15 years later, like we looked at Agent Orange coming out of Vietnam and so forth, okay? Yeah. It's hard to say.
And that's independent of any kind of chemical or biological agents the Iraqis might have had someplace or whatever.
Yeah.
At the same time. All right. Now, while you talked about, you being in Saudi Arabia and so forth, and being able to see the news and that kind of stuff, did you have more personal communication with home than you had had back when you were in Vietnam?
Oh, yes. I might also share with you, I think we left $1 million telephone bill because we figured out how we could direct dial the home. Mm-hmm. But now if you were a unit in the sand, I mean, you had the phone banks there, etc., okay? But remember, we were inside the Emerald City, mm-hmm. Okay? This was a well-developed area. So personally, I knew where I could go to find a phone and I could direct dial home. The only thing I had to watch was the 8-hour difference between home and us. Now, we didn't abuse it, but everybody on the team got to call back at least once, okay? So that was much different, much different.
All right. Now, when you do leave, then what's the physical process of getting out? Where do you fly out of and where do you go?
So KKMC, we went back down to Daharan. Daharan, we loaded on a plane, a civilian plane in this case. It wasn't a C-130. I don't remember where we stopped, but we flew directly into Indianapolis in this case. So not the East Coast, not the West Coast. I mean, family was there waiting when we came in, etc. And it was Katie bar the door. Nobody wanted to hang around the center any longer than you have to. Just a quick debriefing, safety instruction, go out on leave, and then come back and you start working on what you need to do as far as reports are concerned and so forth.
All right.
Very pleasant.
All right, and kind of a contrast to coming back from Vietnam.
Yes, the 180 again, just a complete different.
Okay, so what kind of cleanup then did you have to do once you got back? Did you have to have a lot of work, a lot of paperwork to do, or was it Not too bad?
Not bad at all, because we didn't take any heavy equipment, transportation-wise, over with us, so it was mainly personnel equipment, after-action reports, doing things of that nature. Lessons learned, we always had lessons learned. I always say lessons forgotten, because they got written down and it seemed like it always came up 2 years later and said, did we just go through this nut drill? But people change, and that's what happens. They don't necessarily read the after-action report or the lessons learned. Or things change in terms of the equipment and everything like that. I mean, when we went to Operation Joint Endeavor, 95, 96, I mean, we communicated by the internet. I mean, that's how we came through those three different kinds of things. I mean, that was just absolutely amazing. I was still communicating with IUSB in terms of my work role via the internet at that time.
All right. So you're back in 91, and then you have, is the things relatively quiet for a few years?
For about 4 years, I was still at IUSB. In 95, the balloon goes up for Operation Joint Endeavor. The unit gets mobilized again, not 150, I want to say about 80 or 90. We fell in on Kaiserslautern at that particular time. And the main operating base was out of Kaiserslautern, Germany, and we had a forward logged unit at the end of the rail line in Hungary, because we were now moving stuff out of Germany down to Hungary, and then from Hungary on into Serbia, Kosovo, etc., Croatia, okay?
So this is all peacekeeping in what used to be Yugoslavia that
Yep.
you're supporting?
Yep.
All right.
Again, a very safe environment, log missions. Now I'm working with the Germans, the Austrians, and the Hungarians in a liaison kind of way to make sure the rail lines are open, and making sure that we have convoy clearances in terms of moving stuff via the highway and everything of that nature. So again, in a very safe kind of environment, protective kind of environment, working with the host nation, solving problems, keeping things moving, etc. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything better again, okay?
All right. Were there notable differences between how the Germans, Austrians, and Hungarians worked, or was it fairly seamless?
Well, the Germans were very well prepared, because remember, we had Reforger and a return of forces to Germany during the Cold War. Then we had Deforger, where we moved everything out of Germany, okay, the 7th Corps, down to Saudi Arabia. So a lot of experience there, okay, and prepositioned equipment in Germany and everything like that, where we had nothing prepositioned as far as the Saudis were concerned. So we had that experience coming out of Germany again in supporting Operation Joint Endeavor. And the liaison were just excellent, okay? I mean, they knew the inside and the out. The Australian liaison officer knew who to contact to get the convoy clearance if there was any problem along the road and everything like that. Again, just tremendous professional personnel in a counterpart kind of way.
Okay.
And all military.
Okay.
But the military knew who to contact in a civilian kind of way.
Right. But then in Austria or in Hungary, was it different there?
Nope, same thing.
Okay.
Great liaison again. The only thing is, in Hungary, we jammed so much in terms of the rail, they didn't have time to unload it. We backed up the trains when we were starting that.
All right. Now, I guess if you, and then that's getting right down to the point pretty much where you will.
So 96, I come back. Third deployment or third combat area, not quite so close combat each one of those times. I'm at IUSB, and IUSB is a little bit unsettled with me now. I got pulled out twice as a professional person there, and we all understand the laws and everything like that, but that puts a tremendous strain on the office that you're trying to run and everything like that, okay? I kind of felt like I had outworn my welcome there. I always referred to myself when I got mobilized for Desert Storm, but I was a closet reservist. Most of the professors there, the staff there, didn't know that I was participating or anything like that. So they were utterly surprised, and I guess that was part of my education, is write the letters home from the Gulf and kind of educate them a little bit more on what a reservist does when he's mobilized and so forth, okay? So I came back in 96, assumed my same job again. kind of associate dean for student services and registrar. And I had applied prior to that to West Point for registrars and an assistant dean kind of position, but I didn't make it any place. And they hired an in-person kind of thing, I learned later. So the second time I said, I'm going to give this another shot, but I downplayed my military bio, because the first time I did play my military bio with West Point, you'd think that'd be a positive, right? So I downplayed that, worked more on the civilian part of it, got invited to an interview, and they were pleasantly surprised to hear my military background as I went through the committee and was shown around and everything like that. And that went well. I mean, in '97, I was headed then in June to United States Military Academy. Stayed there for 13 years and absolutely loved every year of it, okay?
All right. And then,
Put me back in higher education again. I had the adult student, so I missed the maturity of the adult student and had pretty much the 18 to 21-year-old and some immaturity, I shouldn't say that, okay? But great students, cadets again, but a different kind of cadet, okay? So I was back working in higher education, absolutely loved it again, okay? Teaching, leadership course, psych course, and so forth.
all right. And then,
Stayed there for 13 years till 2010.
so you're doing that then through 9/11 and through.
Yep. I'm a civilian now. I'm a civilian in a military setting, okay? Because I hit my mandatory retirement date after 28 years. So, and I hit that the same year, '97, that I went to West Point. So I went in as a civilian.
Right. So what was the response at West Point to 9/11?
Wow, that was devastating. And I remember sitting at my desk when we saw the first thing happening on TV, and it impacted many parents that were connected to the towers and had a son or a daughter at West Point. I mean, that's where you really felt it. But in addition to that, a lot of the firemen and the policemen didn't live in Manhattan proper. They lived upstate, an hour and a half, 2 hours away because of the cost of living. And oh, by the way, if you're a policeman or fireman, you went down for 3 shifts. You could work the 3 shifts, you had a place to stay, you come back to the community, etc. So some of the local communities really got hit hard in terms of firemen and policemen. So that was a second whammy during 9/11. So it's not only the academy, but the small community, Fort Montgomery, that we lived in, or the surrounding communities there, that we really felt the impact of that. And that's where our security went up at West Point. And all of a sudden, you didn't have enough MPs to put on the front gate in an extended kind of way. And so the dean, a 1-star, was out there pulling security at the front gate. We were pulling security there. Any military was pursuing security. Civilians helped out in kind of way. And I remember the dean coming back one night and saying, boy, you never want to be on duty when the hockey team comes back because their bags are really strong. So there's a lot of little stories like that you never hear anyplace else, but just kind of humanizes everything that happens.
All right. And
What happened after 2010? Okay, I'm on Social Security by now. I'm getting older. Maybe it's time to retire, and Diane wanted to come back at that particular time. So I came back, spent a year. We built a new house, but the whole walkout lower basement was undeveloped. And I said, well, that's going to be my task for a year. So 125 sheets of sheetrock, 10 foot high, so forth. I have totally immersed myself in that. Took my lunch bucket to the basement, worked hard there, and I literally flunked retirement. I flunked retirement. And I was serving on a committee at the Alcohol Addictions and Resource Center in South Bend. And I had served on it when I was with IUSB on the board of directors. Went back, I showed my resume there, and Steve Camilleri, the executive director for the Center of the Homosomai, resume and say, hey, you know, we're opening up a center, a 24-bed center for homeless veterans. And he talked me into that, okay? So in 2012, I became, 2011, the end of 2011, I became the director of the Robert Miller Veterans Center for Homeless Veterans, a 24-bed facility.
Okay.
And have been there since, almost 5+ years.
And is that in South Bend? or-
That's in South Bend.
All right. Yeah, well, there are worse ways to flunk retirement, I think that.
It keeps me busy. It gets me out of the
All
house and
right.
everything.
All right, well, it makes for a pretty remarkable and unusual story.
It's
So
different.
thank you very much for taking the time
Well,
to share it.
thank you for what you're doing with veterans, okay?